2020. The time is 4:01, and we are here for the Resolution Report Committee meeting. First, I want to call the meeting to order and establish quorum. Mr. Sweeney.
I'm here.
Mr. Martinez. Mr. Martinez?
He's not in attendance today.
Okay. We, let's see, Ms. Ross.
Present.
We also have Director Fitchard and Mr. Pinkley with us today. We're going to have Mr. Pinkley do the electronic meeting statement.
Thank you, Mr. Wetzel. So as we've done with all of our meetings under this new electronic meetings system, I'll just provide a brief overview and then open the floor for a motion. So the governor has extended his executive order that allows for boards to meet electronically. The authorization for that has been extended through Executive Order 60. That order will last through the month of October. So essentially what we need today is a motion that states that the board needs to meet today to conduct essential business and is doing so electronically to protect the safety and welfare of Tennesseans.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Can we have someone second that motion, please?
Second, if Mr. Sweeney moved it.
And if Ms. Ross moved it, I'll second hers, whichever way.
Do you second that, Ms. Ross?
Yes.
Thank you. And we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Ms. Ross?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you very much. So we'll move forward with the meeting. I am going to turn the reins over to Director Fitchard.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are here to discuss how we will display the proposed resolution reports and investigation summaries on Nashville.gov. So Dr. Valier is here, Assistant Director Chris Clausey, and then Legal Advisor Todd Pinkley. They're here to weigh in on the discussion and to assist with specific questions regarding the COB website info, investigations, and confidentiality concerns. Some of the points that we need to address today will be: how does the board want this information displayed? Do we post unredacted information, the complainant's name, the officer's name or badge number? What are other oversight agencies doing across the country? What's the best practice for transparency and accountability? What does Tennessee state law say about privacy or confidentiality regarding MNCO investigations? Are there any protections? And then at the end, we'll also answer any questions about the process or the material that'll be posted. So I would like to get started with talking about how this information will be displayed. So Dr. Valier has been working on, with me, trying to determine, how will we get this up on our website and how it would be functional and available to our residents here. And so that is going to kind of drive the conversation today because we want to know and we need to get this up and they need to build this for us. And so if you guys have any questions about that, but I'm going to, then you would direct them to Dr. Valier. I'm going to let him chime in a little bit on that to talk about that process because it's important that we have all of the information before we go to ITS to set this up for us. So Dr. Valier, you want to chime in?
Sure. So we're required to post the proposed resolution reports 10 days prior to the meeting, and ITS will require a day to 2 days notice in order to get those posted online to make sure that they're posted in time. in having a conversation with the web team for Nashville.gov, they are able to create a table on a page for us. We have to decide what those columns will be. It might be easiest, Mr. Pinkley, if I'm able to share my screen, or if I can share my screen and put up information.
Just 1 second.
Let's see. Let me try this one more time. Okay, so I pulled up the a table where we put information from the mock case that Director Pitcher created, and on this would be an example. The website would have an introduction to what is on there, and then we would have a list of the proposed resolution reports. On the leftmost column, we would have the case number, and that would link to the complete proposed resolution report. The proposed resolution report that was the dummy had information about the officer's last name. It would have a date that we posted it, so we can show that we had the 10 days prior to the board hearing. Where we can put allegations, we would list those. If there's multiple allegations, we can number them accordingly. And then we could have, once the disposition is approved by the board, we would go back and we could add dispositions related to each allegation. We then also will once that proposed resolution report is forwarded to the chief of police, we will be receiving a response from the chief of police, which we would link to in the final cell of that row. In having conversations with the Director Pitcher about the information that we want, we wanted to see if the board, what information, if there was additional information that would be requested to put on the website with links to the proposed resolution reports. And then if identifying information, for instance, officer last name or complainant information should be listed, not listed, and whether that should or should not be included in the proposed resolution reports. Since the mock report that was created included both complainants' names and officer names. So that's the first point of discussion, is what information should be in the table as well, and then what information should be included in the proposed resolution reports.
Okay, thank you. So does anyone have questions about this or have any input or insight into what you think about this table, and or if you would like to see maybe something else in the table? And just so that you know, Dr. Valier, we're also supposed to post the investigation summary. So that's more than just the PRR.
Okay, so if that's a separate document, we can include a link to the investigation summary as well.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to jump in and ask questions about this process?
I don't know if I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'll just put it out there. Has there been any talk about how the amount of information that is out there might impact someone's willingness to what's on the report. Like if someone, a complainant wanted to have more privacy around it, have we discussed?
Yes, we've had conversations about the impact of concerns around privacy for complainants. So, for instance, if someone who's thinking about making a complaint goes to our website and sees case summaries or proposed resolution reports that include names being available on the website, they may be less likely. It might serve as a deterrent for somebody to feel comfortable making a complaint. Even if we don't include that information is still available by public record request. So we can't fully protect confidentiality in all cases. However, we are able to not proactively release that on the website in public documents or in documents that we make public on the website proactively.
Thank you.
So yeah, we are moving a little ahead. Then I was going to have Mr. Pinkley talk a little bit about that. But before we move into those types of things and redacting, I just kind of want to stick to like what we were talking about in regards to what needs to go on this table. Do you think that there is enough information here on the table, or do you think that it should have any additional information, or we just want some information, some feedback on that?
Why is it possible, or why did you have the officer's last name? What about the complainant? Could you do, I forgot. And what was the thought there? And basically, what are other cities doing when they post information?
So I'm going to let Mr. Valier, Dr. Valier talk about that too. I sent you all a list of cities that to show you what was best practices, or not necessarily best practices, I'm sorry, what was happening in other cities and how they were posting this type of information. Dr. Valier created a chart with the website, with the files, and how they were posting complainant names and officers' names. So he had on there Seattle, Albuquerque, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Chicago, Copa, Atlanta, and San Diego, as well as San Francisco. And it seems like each city is doing something different. So for instance, Seattle substitutes and uses the word complainant. And then for the officer, they use named employee. In Albuquerque, they redact the complainant's name and the officer's last name is abbreviated. In DC, they use complainant and subject officer. In Cleveland, they use the complainant's last name only, as well as the officer's last name only. And then in Chicago, they redact the information in the summary reports for the officer and as well as the complainant. In Atlanta, they use complainant, and then they include the officer's full name. San Diego, they usually use complainant, but they use the full name for someone who's deceased. And then they also substitute deputy one, because that's what they call them. They're deputies there. And then in San Francisco, they use the term complainant and the named officer. So every city is doing something slightly different. So I think it's fair to say that this is an open area for us, and we can make that decision. But that's why we're here today, to try to figure out what's the best route for Nashville. I also sent that information to you all, and it talks about identifying information included in the reports, and what other agencies are doing. If names are included, that document may result in an internet search for that person. For complainants, having complaint searchable, it could affect applying for jobs or housing. If privacy is a concern for a prospective complainant, having names, and I think Dr. Villier just mentioned, it could deter how we, our residents or anyone files complaints with us. But state law, and I'll let Mr. Pinkley talk about this shortly, about what the law says in regards to MNCO's investigations. Do you guys have any other questions about what was posted here, about the chart?
I have a question. Is there, being that we're discussing whether the complainant would be on the form or not, is there ever would it be possible to consider having the complainant's name on it, but maybe there are circumstances in which the complainant's name can be left off? Or is it something that has to be consistent completely across the board? Either it's on or it's off.
Well, I'm also thinking about if we had a complainant who was a juvenile, we need to talk about that too, Dr. Villier and Mr. Pinkley. But I think, and Dr. Villier, you can jump in here. I think having something consistent is going to work better for us so that it doesn't become confusing to someone who's trying to read online what's happening. But what do you think, Dr. Villier, in regards to that?
I think consistency is helpful. While I do think it would be reasonable to ask someone whether or not what they would prefer, I worry that if some decide that they don't want their names and some do, that the likelihood of making a mistake on whose information is presented and who's not, I think is pretty high given the number of cases and how tracking that might be challenging and making sure everyone is asked and is fully informed around that decision.
Did that answer your question, Mr. Witzel?
It did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions about what's happening in other cities? Okay. So,
Jill,
yes.
For me personally, I would like to see the last names of complainants and officers with the direction that on intake that they asked if the complainant asked if their name could be placed on the report.
So, okay, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about that. So when we talking about what's the best practice for transparency and accountability, I think that's what that brings up a good point for Ms. Ross is the fact that, if we're going to put names up, then, putting both names up is probably is the best practice for transparency. And so I do think that we need to create some type of standard, put it on our form, our complaint form, that this information is not, private, right? And that when people fill out a complaint with us, that information is subject to the Tennessee Open Records rules and laws. And so I'm going to let Mr. Pinkley. I'm sorry, Member Sweeney? Sorry, Mr. Witzel, that's your job.
Yes, a couple thoughts. I do agree that we should treat the complainant and the officer the same way. So whatever we do for one, I think we should do for the other. There are circumstances under which anonymous complaints can be made. And so maybe that addresses, one part of one issue. But, you know, I wonder if there's a distinction too that can be made between stages of the case, so that at the outset, when we finish everything that we're supposed to do, we're still making a recommendation. And then it goes to the police department and they make a decision and inform us of that decision. And I'm wondering is, you know, if we do it one way at the beginning through our process, and then after we receive the response back from the police department, that we then identify names, at least in a chart of some sort, and at least by way of last name, so that maybe in this process at this stage up through our PRR, they get listed in the chart here as with nothing. There's no names at all in the chart. It just has the complaint number, and it has the statistical information, including the charges and dates when things were posted. And then on the PRR and on the investigative report, that they're redacted to just say complainant and officer or complainant and employee. And that then after we receive the response back from the police department, the redactions are reversed and the full information is there going forward.
Yeah, I like that idea. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it provides, because eventually both of the, I think during the process, because it's still an open investigation, I think that makes sense to have it redacted until we get a response from the chief of police. Does anyone have any other ideas? Brenda, I'm sorry, Member Ross or Member Switzel? What do you think about that idea?
Actually like that idea, I agree.
If I might ask a clarifying question, are there circumstances where, or what are the circumstances where we might not post that information once a case is closed on, you know, whether or not it's listed on the website itself or inside of the case summary or PRR? So I'm thinking, for instance, if someone was a victim of sexual violence who then makes a report about courtesy of the officer who responded, or that individual's last name would then be public, and I'm curious whether that or how we should take that into account.
Mr. Sweeney?
I think that's a great question. And maybe we should kind of reserve to ourselves that says that, you know, in extraordinary circumstances, even at the end, we'll not post information regarding a complaint. I don't know what the criteria is for making that decision. You know, because considering the fact that when this is all over, all of this is public. It's all discoverable. And yes, there is a big difference between something being public and something being accessible. And that makes the difference. I guess I'd be interested in knowing, are there other comparable situations where you have a complainant like that, either a juvenile or somebody who's been the victim of sexual assault, who makes a public claim and then it's kept confidential? I mean, there are John Doe lawsuits that got filed from time to time. And those stay, in that sense, private, which seems to provide, some recognized legal basis by which that could be done. But I don't know what that is or what circumstances or what it could apply to. But I think that's a great idea to consider that as a exception to the standard rule that when the matter is concluded, that the complainant and the respondent or officer will be publicly identified.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sweeney. I guess I have two thoughts. Number one, when it comes to victims of sexual assault, we would not be working those cases. I mean, if it's a criminal case, we're going to probably forward that on to the district attorney's office. We may work for the misconduct, but it seems like those types of cases would be super rare. That's one thing. And then the second thing is the police department, what they do currently is they just use initials for people who are victims of those types of crimes. And so that's another, they just use the first and last initial. And then, of course, we need to figure out what to do with juveniles, of course. And it may be that we would have to, and we can work on this later, but we may have to use the complainant as not maybe the parent of the juvenile. But those are good questions and things that we need to work through. I appreciate that.
Questions? Before we move on? Okay, I don't see any hands or anything, so.
Okay. So the next thing is I wanted to talk a little bit about what does the Tennessee state law say about privacy or confidentiality? And I'm going to let Mr. Pinkley chime in on that.
So I think I've said this before, but if not, the Tennessee Open Records Act is very broad and it's geared towards as much transparency as possible. So when we're getting complaints in, we have to keep in mind that those complaints will likely be discoverable if someone files an open records request. And that the same thing will also apply to our proposed resolution reports. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as we're going forward. Kind of to Dr. Valier's concerns about potential sex crime related complaints, there are additional protections that would be afforded to rape victims or sex crime victims, and also juveniles are afforded extra protection under the Open Records Act. I don't have those statutes in front of me, so I don't know exactly the limitations on that confidentiality, but that would be a reason to maybe create a distinction between those types of complaints versus just a standard discourtesy complaint.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions around that? Okay. I guess we can move on to the next.
So when we're talking about best practice for transparency and accountability, it seems like we've kind of touched on it a little bit already in every little part that we've spoken about. And so do you guys have any suggestions or if you have any feedback in regards to, the best practice for transparency and accountability as it pertains to, these these resolution reports and investigation reports being posted online, as well as, I would like, we think about the process of how this is posted online for 10 days. So that, I think that in itself was, I wasn't on the rules committee, Mr. Sweeney, you can talk about this, or Ms. Ross, in regards to the purpose behind posting it for the 10 days.
Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Sweeney, I see your hand is up. I see you.
Yeah, sorry. The reason for the 10 days was in order to provide adequate time for board members to study and consider the recommendation, and then adequate time for the parties to consider whether to request a hearing, and then adequate time for the board chair to decide whether to grant a hearing, and then time to be prepared to do that. So the 10 days was done in combination to allow all of that to occur.
Okay, thank you. And just to be clear, just for clarity, the hearing is not a, the hearing is where each party can speak respectively for their, I guess it was 5 minutes, I believe, or something like that. It's not where we would present any exhibits or anything of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct. It's not evidentiary. It's just for them to make argument or to point out particular things that they don't think that the report adequately evaluates. And permission to speak would not be granted as a matter of course, but they would have to convince the chair that there is something beyond what has been presented in the report that should be considered by the board in order to have a full understanding of the case.
Thank you. Ms. Ross?
On this resolution report, in the summary section, are we going to use the first and last names of the complainant and officer, as well as the location of the incident? I'm just asking, so maybe there won't be any retaliation, threatening, or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I'm looking at the summary of complaint allegations, and I think, what Mr. Sweeney suggested is that we would redact that. And maybe we can, like I have on here in this mock proposed resolution report, I have the complete address, and maybe I could just take out the complete address and just leave the area in there. You know what I'm saying? So instead of 1234 Happy Hollow Lane in East Nashville, I could just redact the Happy Hollow Lane and just leave it in East Nashville, or the zip code.
Thank you.
What do you guys think?
I think that may be appropriate. I think that if you're making a redaction, it should be clear that there is a redaction. So it should, be blanked or it should be darkened over, or something like that. I also think that it's super important how we do the redactions, because by a lot of technology these days, if you make a redaction by technology, it can be removed by technology. And there have been a number of very public situations of things that were filed in court where there was an electronic redaction and it wasn't done right. And then the press pulled it up and they reversed the redaction and they knew exactly what was taken out. And so it's not only important that we do the redaction, but I think it's necessary for transparency to show that we have done a redaction and that we do it in the way that we are absolutely certain, whether it's done physically or electronically, that it can't be reversed.
That's a good point. Thank you for that.
Along those same lines, we might also consider, do we redact witness names? Or are we only talking about the officer and the complainant?
Yeah, I actually was going to bring that up because, you know, if we're going to be posting the investigation summary, you know, it's going to have if there were witnesses, it would have the witness information as well. And so that's something that we need to think about. And I think that maybe redact that information as well until the final comes out. And then, of course, once the chief of police gives us a response, then all of that information would be available at that point.
We can call them witness 1 and witness 2 or something like that. The question, I guess one question becomes, we need to figure out a way that we don't redact so far that you can't understand what you're reading. So, right. For example, if witness 2 is a second police officer, maybe it's important to show that that witness is a police officer, not because of credibility, either greater or lesser, but as to, you know, where they were or what they saw or their, you know, why they were there in the first place. And that might apply to other witnesses as well. So I think that type of redaction of witnesses is different from the redaction of the parties and needs to be very carefully considered so that, you know, when the board is reviewing things, that, you know, we have the full understanding. Because when the package goes to the police department, they're going to have all the names of everybody. So they're not going to get it in redacted form. So, you know, we have to make sure that the board is fully informed of the investigation and of the PRR, so that it can make its decision accordingly.
Right, and I agree with you. And I also would say that the board will have the opportunity to see all of the information if they make an appointment and come to the office to review it in its unredacted form. So, you know, every board member will have the option to look in the investigative file.
Thank you very much for that. I have a question. In regards to juveniles, I know we discussed how to protect juveniles or maybe having the parent's name on there. Is there a way, are we looking to still indicate that this was a juvenile, even if his name is not on is not on the document.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a way to say that, you know, you can say a person aged whatever, right? You can say there's many ways to say that this was a child instead of a adult. So you could say that it was a person aged 16, blah, blah, blah. But we haven't really worked through that yet. So those are some good questions, and I'm writing them down so that we can figure that out. On how we deal with those types of cases. Mr. Sweeney?
Yeah, again, the transparency issue where, you know, we want to show that there's been redactions and that there've been, you know, removals, things have been covered up. I don't think that we want to add and make the redacted document have great information, like if we were putting, you know, a witness 16 years old, but that wasn't in the version of the PRR and the investigative report itself. Now, maybe that's obvious that it should be in the investigative report in the first place. But so one thing that I'm thinking is, to the extent that we need to convey additional information necessary to a full understanding, you know, there might be an appendix, for lack of a better word, to the redacted document that said, you know, for example, that witness 1 was a juvenile, or witness 2 was a police officer, or witness 3 was, you know, a service station employee, whatever. You know, we could provide additional information on like an addendum, if that would make things clearer. I'd rather, I think, put that in an addendum than add it into a redacted report, putting in information that wasn't in the original report.
Yeah, that makes sense. What I was thinking of that we would say that in the investigative summary, though, when I talked about the juvenile, but I think an addendum makes sense, and it's simple to do, and it keeps it flowing well, and it's not that confusing. Thanks, Mr. Sweeney. Ms. Ross?
I agree with the addendum, like Mr. Sweeney just mentioned. So everybody knows who's who, particularly if they're witnesses.
Okay, makes sense to me. Mr. Witzel, I think that, yeah. So it seems like, so that would be, I think, what I was talking about in response to best practice for transparency and accountability. And then I guess I'm assuming, since we didn't, I just want to be clear that how we're going to post this online, you are all okay with this particular, with the boxes that we have here, and you don't necessarily want to add anything to this box, the boxes that Dr. Valier created that would go on our website. Or after this discussion, you would think that we need to change it somewhat.
I think it looks fine.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes, I was just saying, I think it looks fine.
Thank you.
Mr. Valier?
Go to Ms. Ross. I was going to bring up what she had said earlier.
Ms. Ross?
Yes, I think, are you adding case summary in there because it's up on the screen right now? Yes or no? I have to call you back.
That is my understanding that the case summary or investigative report will also be posted.
Okay.
Ms. Ross had mentioned earlier in the conversation also having a column for complainant last name. Is that something that people should think should be on there?
Could you repeat that last part, a column for
complainant's last name?
I thought that we had decided, at least for discussion purposes, that we wouldn't have any names on there, and that we would only have, you know, a different version of that, which would have names on it, both officer and complainant, unless there's, you know, a John Doe, Jane Doe exception, after we get a response back from the police department.
That was my understanding, but the names would be blank until after the case was officially closed with a response from the police. The question is whether that should be on the web page prior to clicking into the proposed resolution report, and whether that should be on that web page.
At which stage?
After a response from the police chief.
I think it should have both the officer and the complainant, unless there's a Doe exception for the complainant.
Okay, maybe I'm a little confused. So are we saying that we're going to change this form on a regular basis, or are you just going to leave it like that and just blank until we get the disposition back? I'm sorry, we get the response back. Because you can't change it constantly. Like once you start, whatever form that we use online, that's how it's going to be. And so we can go back and add the complainant's names, but we won't be able to change the boxes and do all of that.
We will be able to update so when we add the chief's response, we will be able to update the information for that case. We just have to send that as a table to the web team of what it should be changed to.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yeah, question. The case summary, is that actually going to have a narrative summary of any type, or that's just going to link to the investigative summary?
That would link to the investigative summary.
Okay. And then where, I guess, where is the link to the PRR?
That would be on the case number. So the case number would be the hot link to the resolution report.
What if we have a case number that's just a number? Nothing more than a number, just for clarity. And then have a column for investigative summary, a column for PRR with the links to those documents.
We could have that. We could definitely do that. This could be just the case number without a link. Right? It's getting a little jammed. Let me.
Can we flip the chart and?
That's yeah. So now we could have just the case number on the first column, and the case summary and PRR would have their own. So we'd have a link in the second column to the case summary, In the third column, would have a link to the proposed resolution report.
Yep.
And then in the final column, there'd be a link to the chief of police response. And when we get that response, we would fill in the officer and complainant's names.
Yep. That makes sense to me.
Yep.
If we're posting redacted case summaries and PRRs initially, would we need to re-upload those as non-redacted?
I would think so.
Right.
Okay.
And what about the disposition there? What would you put? Is that after the chief of police's response? Or?
The disposition, I would believe, would come from the approval of the proposed resolution report from the board. Once the resolution report is accepted and the disposition recommendation is made, I believe that would be the disposition from the COB. And then the chief of police response would be in response to that disposition.
So it would say, would it say just like what we have in the rules, which is approved, not approved, or would you put the actual?
So for each allegation would have a sustained, unsustained, not sustained, or policy exoneration, or unfounded attached to it. And so those would be the dispositions that, unless anyone on the board feels that we should be doing that differently.
Well, here's a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
Maybe with the going over to the left where the PRR is first, have PRR and proposed disposition. Okay. And then, since space obviously is going to be tight and there could be several different outcomes in the same matter, maybe if we have a legend on the bottom, you know, for each of the dispositions, you know, sustained is 1, not sustained is 2, whatever. And then in the table, we could have, you know, 1, 2, 5, whatever. So we could have multiple numbers for multiple charges. And then maybe reverse the last 2 columns of have, you know, chief of police response and then final disposition.
Would we have a board disposition and then final disposition, or?
Yeah, well, we have a board recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, you know, the PRR and board, you know, proposed disposition. Because all the board can do is make a recommendation, but it would be valuable, I think, to show the difference between what we proposed and what the police did. So maybe it's just final MNPD disposition.
Okay, and so we could have in the PRR and proposed disposition columns, then that would be what the proposed disposition was from the board.
Yeah. So what I suggest is, because only the board can make the proposed disposition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I would suggest, and I don't know if this is doable or if it's mixing too many different things, to have the link and then have the number, you know, for whatever the proposed disposition is. But I don't know if you can have a link and a number.
That might be easier to split into 2 columns.
Yeah. You could have PRR, and then you could have board proposed position. Maybe.
Put it in the PRR and propose board disposition.
Would it make sense to have the allegation next to the proposed board disposition?
Yes.
It might actually make sense to have it all the way at the front, just next to the number.
That would make sense as well.
Yeah.
I agree.
While you're doing that, Dr. Valier, let me ask a question. So what happens and how big is this going to be? Like, because if you have a person that has, let's just say 5 or 6 allegations, right? And there's multiple, let's just say there's multiple officers involved in one. So we have one complainant, right? And then we have, let's just say 3 officers involved. They still fall under that one complaint number. And so can we talk a little bit about how that would look on this form? And the multiple instances of the allegations, how would that look on here?
Bill, could you have your case number? Could it be officer? I mean, maybe not officer, but in parentheses 1, the next line, 2, something like that. If it's 2 officers, different officers on the complaint.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're trying to, like, I think that we could have it. So that would be so that's right here. If we're using this one, let's just say courtesy. And then there was like, what about the allegation? Courtesy, unprofessionalism, unbecoming of an officer, excessive force. Like, how would you add all that in here, Dr. Valier?
So one of the challenges, and I think Ms. Ross, your suggestion is really helpful. So one officer might have 4 charges, and then a second officer might have 2 charges. So in the case where there's multiple charges, I would see numbering those as being a good way to do that. And then the proposed board dispositions could match that. For the multiple officers, one solution could be, oh, that was the wrong. Could be to have officer 2 as a separate row, and then they would have their own chart, their own allegations there, and those would be numbered as well, since they can differ.
And then I would think if you have that case where you have 6 or 7 different charges against one person, what you might do is you might just identify the most serious, because this is just a summary, and say, and others. I mean, I think the way Dr. Valier has suggested is best in your normal situation, but if you have something that just isn't practical for charting it all, I think you could do an abbreviated form.
We could have like a courtesy et al. And give the highest charge and say, and others.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And over when it goes to where it says proposed board disposition, I just want to like clarify that, the board doesn't make, so there's 2 things here. in the PR, you know, the ED is going to make and it is going to, sorry, let me get to it. It's going to make a recommendation for corrective action. And that's where you would have whether an allegation had been sustained. But the board only makes, they take 4 actions, and those actions are they're going to accept the PRR, accept but modify, reject, or return for the further investigation. Which one are you going to put in this online? The board's actions or the ED's recommended corrective action?
I would think you'd want the board's action.
Right. So that would say, Dr. Valier, let's just use the first column. So under proposed board disposition here, you could say accept.
Now, I think what we do is we make a recommendation. So I think it would be recommended board disposition. Because regardless of what we do, meaning we either accept what you're proposing or we modify it on our own,
right?
That it's then the board's recommendation. So I think, you know.
So what should it say?
Recommended board disposition, I think.
Okay. So in that it would say accept and sustained, or like how would it?
It depends. I mean, you know, say that you recommended something not sustained, and the board decided sustained, then it would say sustained.
Gotcha.
And vice versa.
So I guess that brings up another. Issue. So we would need to have a follow-up, some type of follow-up form with the board's recommendations before we send it off to the police department for a final review and response.
But I think what you'd want to do is you just want to have something signed by the board chair that says, you know, attached is the resolution report that's been approved by the board, where we make the recommendations as stated. Something simple like that and signed by the chair.
Okay. Ms. Ross?
Yes, okay, now on the board recommendations, accept the report as submitted, accept, modified, reject, and return. Could we not use like in the addendum 1, 2, 3, 4 or something like that, going along with the other?
Mr. Sweeney, I see your hand up. I don't know if you have a response to that.
No, I don't, and I'm sorry. I do have a thought, though. I think the sustained, not sustained, where we make a final disposition, we have them in there by the numbers by charge. To the extent that we haven't done any of that, and instead we have returned it for further investigation, that's what we would put in that spot. And then after it gets reworked by the MNCO, it can come back to us, and I would suggest that we be able to add in a new, and I always forget what this is, row or column. I think it's row, where you'd show the number again and you'd show in paren something like resubmitted. And then put whatever the appropriate information by ways of date and such.
Where the chief of police responses, is that going to be just, are you going to have anything in that box, or are you just going to have the link? Would you say anything like, I mean, I don't know what language could possibly go in there.
I don't know that there has to be language, because right next to that we have the position.
Okay.
So I think all we need is the link.
Yeah, I think it would just be a link to the letter or response from the chief.
Mr. Sweeney, when you were talking about putting something on resubmitted, are you talking about like if a PR was sent back to MNCO for further investigation? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
I presume that after you do the further investigation, you're going to resubmit it.
Right.
To the board for action.
Gotcha.
And so that it would show up again on the chart, and it would show in numerical order. But in order to distinguish it from what was first submitted, it would show following the number, but in that same number column, resubmitted, and have new posted and hearing dates.
Okay, that makes sense. This has been a really good walkthrough so that we can start getting this stuff up and running and start sending the PRRs to the board.
Mr. Sweeney, one thing you said just now was the aligned in case number. If we're posting multiple, so if we post several documents next week and the week after we post several more, do you think that they should be ordered by case number or by the date of posting?
I think
or by the board or by the hearing date?
My thought is that everything should always be posted by number, because it's the most logical way to follow things.
Hey, and Dr. Valera, are you not going to have a date on here at all? You're just going to have it based on the case number. So would anyone know when this was posted?
So it will have a posted date, and it will have the board hearing. So my concern about posting by case number is that if we post 5 documents, so especially as we get having, a lot more documents that are going to be available on our website. So if we already have 50 documents available, then we add 5 more, but they're kind of peppered in throughout by case number. That might be hard for people to see what new documents have been posted and when the board hearing, or what documents will be seen at the board hearing. So it might be more logical to have it by the hearing date, so that all documents heard on the same day would be together.
That's an administrative decision. It doesn't give me a heartache either way. I think it's easier to follow with matter number, but I don't have any strong feelings.
So let me chew on that for a while.
We will work on that as we start getting more cases. For now, we can work on keeping them in order.
I've been concerned about other information that's been submitted to the board, as Director Fitchard and I talked about, where there are gaps in numbers. And there's no explanation as to why there are gaps in numbers. And it's just because certain information is being presented at certain times. So, I mean, I'm not saying that anything is being hidden or wrong or anything else. But I think, you know, it's also valuable for us to see, you know, if there are gaps in numbers and makes it easier to follow. But I hear what you're saying, Dr. Valier, and that might make a whole lot of sense too for other reasons. So that's just an administrative decision.
Any more thoughts, questions, or ideas about this document?
I'm fine with the document, but I'm like a case number person as opposed to a date. Because you can have so many posted on the same date, but you have a case number going with the date. But other than I'm fine with the document.
I just like to add that I don't have a preference either way. I think the one that is going to be the most user friendly, and I don't know personally what that is, but whatever is going to be the most user friendly, I think is the way we should go.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have an answer, but I will say that if we're talking about being user friendly, or, you know, for people who may not know the case number, right? A lot of people are just not going to have case numbers in their head, but they know the date that they're either that this is supposed to go to a hearing or whatever. And so I think the way that it's posted here, it looks fine for now until once we get 50, 60, 70 cases on here, we'll have to, you know, we can always reconfigure and come back and determine what's the best route. So,
Question, Dr. Valier, can this table be done in a way that it's sortable?
Possibly. The one example of that is, so there's a couple of examples of that. One example that I think is most closely aligned with our resources from the IT side is in Seattle, where they use their open data portal, and their open data portal has links to all of the documents within it. So it has a data table that you can then sort by columns. And they use the same data portal provider that we use. And so that is something that we possibly could look into. The problem with that is I don't believe we can embed that on our website. So it would have to be a link to the data portal.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's another option, that might be, you know, an idea, and we could always put a note on the site that says that this information is sortable by other columns if you go to link at so-and-so.
I can reach out to the person who coordinates the data portal and see if that's an option in Nashville.
Additional questions? Any other thoughts? Dr. Fitcher, do you have any specific questions for us?
no, I just think this is super helpful in regards to working this out and figuring out the best way that, you know, the information is made available to all of the public and how we're going to present these PRRs and what information is made available to the community and, you know, the timeframes. It's just been very helpful for us to work through it together, and also for you guys to give us this type of input and, you know, and have, you know, been able to really talk to us about how this product looks and how this product will also be posted. It has been super helpful. So I thank you all for your time and attention to detail on this, because, you know, it is new for all of us and we're learning through this process. And so thanks. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Director Fitchard. So are we moving on to new business? If there's nothing else, is there any new business we need to discuss? Any announcements?
Yes, I think we have our executive committee meeting coming up next week. It will be on, I believe it's next Wednesday. Is that correct, Mr. Pinkley?
Wednesday.
Yes, it's Wednesday at 4.
Okay, so our executive committee meeting is on Wednesday of next week. That is going to be September the 9th at 4 p.m. And we will welcome our new executive committee at that time.
Thank you, Director Fitchard. Any other announcements? Okay, well, all we'll need now is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, and we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Sweeney.
Aye.
Ms. Ross.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. And we'll see you next time. Have a great afternoon.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.